This story is just a part of a Welsh epic, the Mabinogion. Not long after Pwyll, the Prince of Devon, had spent a year in the underworld, he returned to his court at Arberl. And one day, after one meal had finished and before the next meal had begun, he took his entourage and they went to a mound that was just above the court. And one of his retinue said, "The strange thing about this mound is that if a man of noble birth sits here, he will not leave until he has received a grievous injury or witnessed a wonder." Well, the prince said, "The first one does not frighten me, and I welcome the second." And sure enough, not long after he had sat down, he saw a woman riding towards the mound. She was wearing gold brocade, and she sat on a great white horse. And that horse seemed to be going at a slow trot, so the prince bade his page to run after her and find out who she was. But the page could not catch up to her. And so the next day, the prince and his retinue returned, and this time they brought a swift horse. And when that same woman came, at that same seemingly slow pace, the prince sent his groom to ride after her and find out who she was, but the groom could not catch up to her. So the next day, the prince brought his own horse and waited, and then, indeed, there she was on the horse in the distance. And so the prince leapt into his saddle and he bolted down the mound, certain that he could overtake her. Well, the white horse was still just going at what looked like a slow trot. And the prince urged his horse from a trot to a canter, to a gallop, and still the woman was out of reach. At last he stopped his horse and called out, "Lady, for the sake of the man you love best, wait for me." And she did. She reined in her horse and she called back, "I am glad to wait for you, and it would have been better for your horse if you had asked me a little bit earlier." The prince rode towards her, and as he did, he could see that she had red gold hair, the same color as the torque around her long neck. And the beauty of every woman he had seen before faded from his mind. "My lady, who are you, and what brings you here?" And she said, "My name is Rhiannon, and my father has promised me in marriage to a man of his choosing. But I don't want that man or any man, because I have long loved you. So I've come here to ask if you will have me." The prince said, "If I had my choice of every maiden in the world, you are the one that I would choose." So Rhiannon made the prince promise that 1 year from that day, he would go to her father's court. The prince kept his promise, but as it happened, it took 2 years, 2 banquets, 1 disgruntled bridegroom, some cleverness on the part of Rhiannon, and the invention of a game called Badger in the Bag before Rhiannon and the prince were wed. But they were. And they came back to Arbeth, and for the first year of their marriage, all was well. And for the second year, too, all was well. But in the third year, when there was still no sign of a child, the prince's men came to him and demanded that he put away Rhiannon and take a wife who would give him an heir. The prince said, 3 years is not such a long time. Give us another year, and if a year from now there is still no heir, I will meet with you and I will take your advice in this matter. Rhiannon and the prince had lain together whenever desire took them, but now they were ruled by the moon and by the tides. And well within the year, the birthing chamber was being prepared for Rhiannon. On the eve of May Day, she entered that chamber, attended by 6 women. Through the dull ache that became sharp pain, through the gushing of her waters, swirled with the pink of blood, Rhiannon said to herself over and over again, "Soon I will meet my child." And over again, Rhiannon's strong body bore down until at last out slid the baby. And the baby lay in Rhiannon's arms, waxy and wrinkled and wet. Rhiannon looked down at her son, for he was a baby boy. And his eyes looked up at her. They were so wide and unblinking and deep and dark that looking into them was like falling. It was surrender. The prince and his men, they came and they exclaimed over the new baby, and they were ushered out by the 6 women. Then those women, they took the baby from Rhiannon and they washed him and they swaddled him and they tucked him into his cradle, covered with a cloth of gold. And Rhiannon, she wanted to say, "Give me my baby." But she was so tired, she fell asleep before the words left her lips. And those 6 women, although they had been chosen to tend to Rhiannon and to the new heir, they too all fell asleep. It was just before the rooster crowed that all 6 of those women woke up at the same time. Their eyelids snapped open, and each looked to the other to see which one of them was holding the baby. But none of them were. And they looked in the cradle, and it was empty. One woman said, "We will be hanged." And another woman said, "We will be burned alive." And a third woman said, we will be lucky if that is all that befalls us." But another woman, she had a plan, and she shared it with the rest of the women, and they all swore to do as she said. Some pups had been born, and the women took some of those newborn pups and killed them. And they smeared the blood of those pups on Rhiannon's hands and face and in her hair. And they took the tiny bones and scattered them around her. When Rhiannon awoke, she was surrounded by all 6 women, their eyes like stones and their lips straight as sticks. And she asked, "Where is my son? Give me my son." And they said to her, "You ask for your son? We tried to save him, but you devoured him." Rhiannon looked down at her hands stained with blood, and she said, "I did not do such a thing. I could not do such a thing." But the women stood around with their eyes of stone and their stick mouths and their empty arms crossed over their chests. Not long after, the prince and all of his men came in because the prince wanted to see his son again. And Rhiannon sat still and silent, her white face stained red, as the women told the prince that Rhiannon had snatched the child from the cradle, gobbled him down, and spit out his bones. When the prince's men heard this, they demanded that Rhiannon be killed or banished. But the prince refused. He said, "She has borne me a son, whatever has happened to him. And if she must be punished, then so be it. But do not send her away from me." And so it was agreed. It was decided that Rhiannon would have to spend 7 years at that court. And every day she was to go and stand by the mounting block in the court gate. And every person who came by, Rhiannon had to tell that person that she had destroyed her child. And as well, she had to offer to carry that person on her back right into the castle. Not many people accepted the offer of Rhiannon's back, but for her, saying those words every time was the heavier burden by far. Day after day, Rhiannon stood out in the sun, in the rain, in the snow, and her red gold hair faded and her white skin reddened. And years passed, until one day, right at the mounting block, there appeared an older man. His name was Tiranon, and with him a young lad, and each of them was astride a fine horse. And Rhiannon told them that she had destroyed her son and offered her back to them. And Tiranon said, "A shame on my beard if I were to ride you. I hope, in fact, that I have news that will lighten your burden." And that night, the two, they joined the banquet, for Tiranon had been the vassal of the prince and had served him for many years. So the prince greeted him warmly. And they ate and they drank, and Tiranon told his story. Tiranon had a mare of great speed and strength and beauty, and every eve of May Day, that mare would have a foal, and by morning, the foal would have disappeared. But one year, Tiranon decided to watch over the mare, and he did. And the foal was born, and a great scaly claw reached through the window and snatched it up. Tiranon hacked off the claw, and then he ran outside to see who or what the creature was. But when he got out there, nothing remained except the creature's cries. So he ran back, and there was the mare, and there was the foal. And there as well was a baby boy, swaddled in gold brocade. Tiranon said that he and his wife, they raised this child as their own. And Tiranon said that both the boy and the horse, they grew with unnatural speed. They were just a few months old each, when each one looked like a yearling. And by the time they were a year, they each looked the size and strength of a 3-year-old colt. Tiranon said, "The lad, he always looked familiar to me, like I knew him from before. But I thought perhaps that all parents thought that. Then one day, my lord, I looked at his eyes, and I knew that I had seen those same eyes under your crown when I served you. Shame on my beard if I were to keep another man's son as my own and to extend the torment of his mother. Can you not all see? Is there anyone here who would deny it? The lad is carved from our prince." And the whole court chorused, "Indeed." The boy looked from the father he knew to his new father to Rhiannon, And though he usually looked older than his years, in that moment, he seemed very young indeed. Rhiannon said, "If this is true, then my troubles are over." And the court chorused, "Pryderi! His mother has named him Pryderi, trouble." And Rhiannon said, looking at the boy, perhaps his own name would suit him better. And Tiranon said, "Oh, we call him Gwilly, the golden-haired." There was silence in the court. And the prince said, "Pryderi it is, named by his mother." And from then on, the lad was called Pryderi. And Pryderi, he received grievous injuries, and he witnessed great wonders. But those are other stories from other branches for other times. And thus ends the first branch of the Mabinogion.